and NASA and SpaceX moonbase by 2024. The closest celestial object to us, the Moon, has been out of our reach since the Apollo 17 crew completed its 12-day mission in December 1972. More than 5 decades later, NASA and SpaceX have entered into a sensational partnership to build a human base on the lunar surface. But how feasible is this ambition? And what role does SpaceX and Elon Musk have to play in all of this? Join us as we explore the groundbreaking attempts by NASA and SpaceX to return humans to the Moon by 2024. Between the 7th and 19th of December 1972, the Apollo 17 crew walked the surface of the Moon and its environments. Like curious birds taking to the skies for the first time, they explored far and wide, breaking multiple records. Till date, the Apollo 17 crew holds the record for the longest spacewalk, the longest lunar landing, and the largest lunar samples returned to Earth. Unfortunately, 51 years after they broke these lofty records, the human race is still struggling to make a return to the Moon. Expectedly, our inability to return to the Moon all these years has divided opinions. Some say it's due to the lack of political will from the United States and other big players in the space industry to fund the trip, while others blame it on the inefficiency of our space exploration technologies. But thankfully, we seem to have moved on from all of these challenges, and it appears that another human expedition to the Moon is just a matter of time. Already, NASA has designed a program to facilitate this voyage. It's called the Artemis mission. Similar to the Apollo program, the Artemis mission will feature multiple trips to the Moon. However, the mission will look to break some new records by launching the first black astronaut and the first female astronaut to the Moon. Furthermore, the Artemis mission will see astronauts stay and observe the lunar surface longer than any other sets of astronauts have done in the past. All of these achievements will culminate and pave the way for the main goal of the Artemis mission, which is to build a permanent human base on the Moon. Within the confines of this base, cosmic scientists will perform revolutionary experiments that will help our course to travel to the Martian world someday. In the absence of the Saturn V rocket, which transported astronauts to the Moon in the past, NASA has designed the super heavy lift rocket called the Space Launch System, and a mega rocket known as the Orion space capsule to facilitate all future trips to the Moon. Compared to our current space vehicles, the SLS is utterly impressive. According to the official fact sheet, this powerful beast offers more payload mass, volume, and departure energy than any other single rocket in the history of humanity. And so far, it is the only rocket that can transport the Orion spacecraft, 4 astronauts, and a large cargo directly to the Moon on a single mission. But even with all of this power and might, the SLS does not have the capability to land on the lunar surface. So, NASA, in its wisdom, has another impressive spacecraft that will take astronauts from orbit to the lunar surface. Known as the Human Landing System, or HLS, this space vehicle will also be responsible for transporting astronauts from the Moon's surface to its orbit. And this is where things get interesting. According to our findings, the HLS is not an in-house technology, meaning it wasn't designed by NASA scientists. Instead, it was crafted by engineers at SpaceX. So in other words, NASA is leveraging the expertise of SpaceX in designing space technologies to plan its grand return to the Moon. The Elon Musk-led aerospace company was awarded a mega contract worth $1.15 billion in November 2022 to develop the HLS. And despite stiff opposition from Blue Origin, SpaceX was able to keep the mandate given to it by NASA, as it looks to deliver the HLS in time for the first human trip to the Moon since the early 1970s. As you can imagine, all of these separate systems will work hand in hand to ensure that NASA astronauts enjoy a smooth journey right from the takeoff point on Earth to the final destination point on the Moon. Let's take a close look at how each system will work. From the launch pad, astronauts will climb into the Orion spacecraft, which will be seated on the 322 feet tall SLS rocket. The SLS will then ascend with the Orion spacecraft and its cargo, as well as the crew on board, and travel all the way to the Moon's orbit, where it will dock with a special gateway designed by NASA. From here, astronauts will then transfer from the Orion spacecraft to the Human Landing System, which will take them to the surface of the Moon and return them back to the gateway after they are done with all necessary experiments. From this gateway, astronauts will transfer from the HLS back to the Orion spacecraft, still attached to the SLS, to start their journey back home. On the 16th of November 2022, NASA launched the first ever Artemis mission. This iconic mission was launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at exactly 1:47 a.m. EST, and after traveling 450,000 kilometers to the moon and orbiting just 400 kilometers above the lunar surface, the SLS returned back home. Overall, the Artemis 1 mission was a huge success, covering a total distance of 1.4 million miles across 25 days, 10 hours, and 53 minutes. However, since it was an uncrewed mission, NASA decided that the spacecraft didn't need to touch down on the moon's surface. But even if they wanted to, the human landing system wasn't ready at the time. It's still not ready even as we speak, but SpaceX is expected to complete before the Artemis 3 mission, which is scheduled for late 2025. The decision to award the HLS contract to SpaceX ahead of other competitors is based on the company's exceptional history of designing cheap and efficient space technologies. According to reports, of all the companies that bidded for the contract, SpaceX put in the cheapest bid. But interestingly, the company's proposal was also adjudged to be the best in terms of payload capacity. In other words, SpaceX's bid was so enticing that NASA couldn't overlook it. But despite the fact that SpaceX has proven to be very reliable in the past, NASA doesn't want to put all its eggs in one basket. And as a result, the space agency has continued to encourage other companies to bid for its contracts in view of promoting competition, reducing costs, and improving efficiency. These qualities were lacking during the Apollo mission era, and NASA is keen not to repeat the same mistakes again. Currently, NASA is working toward creating a sustainable pathway for a regular cadence of astronaut moon landings. The first few attempts will be facilitated by the SLS, the Orion spacecraft, the special gateway in the moon's orbit, and of course the HLS designed by SpaceX. As mentioned earlier, the first series of the Artemis mission was a huge success, but the public focus has since shifted to the second phase of the mission, which is expected to happen in November 2024. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do, but considering how the Artemis 1 panned out, it looks like humans will be able to land on the moon in a few years. But for now, we'll have to make do with exploring the lunar surface from a distance. Codenamed Artemis 2, this mission will transport a group of 4 experienced astronauts to the moon's orbit, including Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. The mission will be commanded by Reed Wiseman, who was part of the 41st expedition to the International Space Station, ISS, in 2014. Victor Glover, the pilot of the first operational SpaceX Crew Dragon flight to the ISS in 2020, and flight engineer for the 64th expedition to the ISS, will anchor the cockpit. Former American fighter pilot Christina Koch and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen will act as mission specialists. If everything goes as planned, Christina Koch will become the first woman to travel to the moon. However, Koch and her teammates will not land on the moon. Their proposed 10-day trip is simply to test all the systems that will be used by other astronauts who will look to land on the lunar surface in the future. But nonetheless, a trip around the moon should still excite the veteran astronaut who spent 328 days on the International Space Station in 2020, breaking the record for the longest stay single spaceflight in history by a woman. During this period, Koch orbited the Earth 5,248 times, traveling approximately 139 million miles and supporting over 210 experiments. Now her next trip to space is one that will lay the foundation for our next moon landing attempts, and also inspire other women and men to dream and achieve big things within and beyond the frontiers of our planet. What do you make of the Artemis mission? Will humans ever land on the moon again? Let's know your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please share and subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to hit the like button.